Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I'm R. Indira, formerly Professor of Sociology at the University of Mysore and paper coordinator for the course Education and Society. The module on caste and educational discourse, which will form the basis for this presentation, is written by Dr. Nisha Jolie Nelson, Assistant Professor of Sociology at Loyola College, Thiruvananthapuram. This module looks at the role that caste plays in determining educational access and utilization. In a rigidly stratified society like that of India, caste is the most visible symbol of social stratification. Caste is determined by birth, and access to opportunities as well as denial of these opportunities for social development has for long been determined by one's caste status. The Constitution of India removed all hurdles to caste-based discrimination when it said that all citizens have equal access to opportunity. This was also true of the institution of education. In fact, in the history of Indian society, people who belonged to upper castes always had advantages, and education was virtually considered their right. And those who did not belong to the upper strata of the caste hierarchy were denied opportunities for education. It was only when the Constitution of India mandated that access to educational opportunities must be provided for all citizens, irrespective of caste, class, or gender, that the stage was set for a policy of inclusive education. It must also be remembered that when positive discrimination was approved by the Constitution as a policy, and groups that were hitherto denied opportunities for entering into educational institutions were given special spaces in educational institutions, that it was possible for an entire group of first generation learners to come into educational institutions. This module looks into two aspects of caste and its relation to education. The discourse that centers around caste and education looks into first the question of who got opportunities to enter into educational institutions and made the most of it, and who was denied these opportunities. In the second phase, it discusses the issue of reservation in a holistic perspective. And so in this module, you will get an idea of the role that caste plays in determining educational access and utilization. Caste and education. In the traditional social setup, groups that were placed in the lower strata of caste hierarchy were deprived of the right to education. Caste status is ascribed and is a means of either conferring or denying privileges. Education is a privilege which was enjoyed only by upper castes. Notions and practices associated with the caste system based on social differentiation, which considered access to education the prerogative of upper sections of the society, have been largely responsible for educational backwardness of the underprivileged groups. The positioning of Dalit groups treated as untouchable in the caste structure was the key factor that historically led to their exclusion from knowledge and education in traditional Hindu society. Though schools were legally opened for these communities in the mid-19th century, attempts by Dalits to get education met with considerable opposition. When we link caste system with the educational system, we see that the relationship is very complex and often oppressive. This has been changing over a period of time, but at a very slow pace. Beginnings of educational reforms. As mentioned earlier, a form of social stratification typical of Indian society is the caste system, in which the lower sections of caste hierarchy have been educationally deprived. But with the advent of colonial powers, the proselytization activities of the missionaries found their base in India, and many Hindus in the lower rungs of the caste hierarchy converted to Christianity. When the British colonial power established its empire in India, the Queen of the Sea needed cheap labor. As a result, British officials started imparting education to Indians. The imperial hegemony of the British, coupled with the caste supremacy of the Brahmins, did not really alter the situation of those placed in the lower rungs of the caste hierarchy. To understand Indian society, persons like William Jones and British administrators sought help from the Brahmins. Making use of their upper caste status and the education they already had, the Brahmins only turned this opportunity to their advantage. The upper castes were getting educated both in English and other elite languages. On the other side of the coin, those placed in the bottom rungs of the caste hierarchy were toiling themselves hard and literally lived in a state of servitude. Colonial rule did not really open up opportunities for those lower down in the caste hierarchy to achieve social mobility. On the other hand, it reinforced the hierarchies already inherent in Indian society. It also needs to be mentioned that the main objective of colonial education was not to create a class of leaders, but followers who took orders and served their masters. It was not until the country became independent and adopted the constitution that was committed to the concept and practice of social justice that the subject of bridging social and economic gaps created by caste inequalities through education received serious attention. History of caste-based reservations within the framework of education. Special provisions and concessions for promoting the educational advancement of backward classes were introduced by the British government. This was later converted into caste reservations in educational institutions and in employment. Let's now look at the issue of caste-based reservations in India within the framework of education. Social reform movements supported by liberal Englishmen during 19th century helped those considered Shudras, women and scheduled castes and tribes in this country to enter the portals of the institutions of learning. The entry of a person from a scheduled caste into an educational institution in the country was first recorded in the year 1856. It was in June 1856 that a scheduled caste boy applied for admission into a government school in Dharwad in Karnataka in Bombay Presidency. The incident had created a furor in the administration which ultimately attracted the attention of the rulers. The board of directors was then forced to formulate an educational policy which stated that as long as schools are maintained by the government, the classes of its subjects are to be given admission without any distinction of caste, religion or race. This policy was further strengthened with the enactment of the Caste Disabilities Removal Act of 1872, which removed social and legal inequalities suffered by weaker sections. This was how a small beginning was made in the educational development of marginalized sections in India. This was also later supported by legislations. The demand for entry into educational institutions and for equality of opportunities was first started in the south. The southern states, including parts of Maharashtra, have witnessed movements for ushering social justice due to the pioneering work done by Brahma Naidu, Sri Narayan Guru, Jyotiba Phule, Savitribai Phule and Ayan Kali among others. The first government circular reserving certain posts in favor of backward castes was issued between June 19th and 21st, 1895 by the government of Mysore. On July 25th, 1921, D.D. Golab, a member in the Bombay Legislative Council, moved a resolution for free and compulsory education for caste groups that were treated as untouchables. The most important of the early Dalit movements were the Adi Dharma movement in Punjab, organized in 1926, the movement under Ambedkar in Maharashtra, mainly based among Mahars, which had its organizational beginnings in 1924, the Nama Shudra movement in Bengal, the Adi Dravida movement in Tamil Nadu, the Adi Andhra movement in Andhra, which had its first conference in 1970. In the history of caste reservation policy, the approach of the Justice Party was considered a pioneering venture. It was for the first time that the Justice Party laid down caste-wise reservations for matters of public appointment in 1926. In August 1943, B.R. Ambedkar had secured 8.3% reservations for untouchables. Ambedkar, chairman of the drafting committee of the Constitution, played a seminal role in opening up educational opportunities for vulnerable groups such as scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other backward classes. Social inequalities were deep-rooted and would not be automatically eliminated with political independence. Provision of equal opportunities does not ensure equal utilization of these opportunities because of the play of such factors as caste, gender, and class. In such a situation, reservation emerged as a means of bridging the gaps that existed in utilization of the benefit of equal educational opportunities given by the Constitution. Ambedkar believed that those groups which had suffered deprivation for centuries needed to be given special spaces in opportunities for upward social mobility. It was this thinking that led to the provision of reservation in education through a policy of protective discrimination, now being increasingly referred to as positive discrimination. Today, the notion of inclusive education has taken central stage in the discourse on caste and education. The constitutional commitment to equal educational opportunities for all sections of Indian society recently found expression in the RTE Act implemented in 2010. The right to universal education, which was enshrined in the Constitution of India, was further reinforced by the Right of Children to Free and Compulsory Education Act, which was passed in 2009 and implemented from April 1, 2010. The Act, which made education a fundamental right of every child between the ages of 6 and 14 years, had also laid down that every school and local administration had to reserve 25% of seats for children belonging to socially disadvantaged sections. Section 12 of this Act clearly states that 25% of the seats in private schools have to be set apart for children of disadvantaged groups. Even today, there are reports of violation of the RTE Act by some private institutions which are not ready to open up their schools for children from marginalized groups. It was the Jammu and Kashmir government which, for the first time after independence, adopted a communal reservations policy in 1952. It had reserved 50% to Dogra Hindus of Jammu and 10% was left to the Pandits. The first All India effort to recommend reservations on caste basis, other than those for SCs and STs, was attempted by Kaka Kalelkar Commission in 1953. Kaka Kalelkar Commission was appointed by the Government of India to uphold the provisions of Articles 15 Section 4 and 340 Section 1 of the Indian Constitution. It was appointed in 1953 with the respected Gandhian Kaka Kalelkar as chairman. The report was submitted in 1955. It listed 2,399 communities as backward, with 837 of them being classified as most backward. The Commission recommended reservation of jobs in government and educational institutions for the backward classes. This committee, however, was a failure due to disagreement between the members of the committee. This led to individual state governments appointing their own backward class commissions under the Commission of Enquiry Act and drawing out lists of backward castes for reservation in educational institutions and public appointments. This was followed by the setting up of the Mandal Commission. The Mandal Commission. In 1978, the Janata government had appointed the second All India Backward Classes Commission under the chairmanship of Bindeshwari Prasad Mandal. Popularly known as Mandal Commission, the commission was appointed under the Prime Ministership of Morarji Desai with the objective of identifying the OBCs. In 1980, it published its findings placing a total of 3,428 communities in the OBC category, comprising 54.4% of the country's population. The Mandal Commission recommended that there should be employment quota in public sector organizations, including nationalized banks and private sector undertakings which received financial assistance from the government in one form or the other, and reserved places in higher educational institutions. According to the Commission's report, reservations were to the tune of 27% for the OBCs, in addition to 22.5% job quotas and seats in higher educational institutions that were already in place for SCs and STs. The figure of 27% was arrived at as the Supreme Court limited reservation to a proportion lesser than 50%. Due to a change in the government in 1979, the Mandal Commission's report could not be implemented. In 1989, Janata Dal came to power as the leading party in a national coalition government during the term of Prime Minister VP Singh. He announced plans to implement the Mandal Commission's recommendations, significantly increasing quotas in public sector employment and in university admissions for the communities which had been classified as OBCs by the Mandal Commission. The announcement led to violent resistance in many parts of India, including a series of widely publicized self-immolations by upper caste students. With the coming to power of the Congress-led government of Manmohan Singh in 2004, there were also proposals to extend the quotas to private sector jobs and to certain privileged institutions of higher education. In April 2008, the Supreme Court upheld the Mandal Commission recommendation that 27% of seats in government-funded institutions, including the prestigious Indian Institutes of Technology and Indian Institutes of Management, be reserved for OBCs. However, the Supreme Court did not agree to extend reservations for OBCs to educational institutions in the private sector. Impact of caste reservation on social groups. Reservations were introduced in the last decade of the 19th century in the Indian education system with a view to bringing about overall social development. Known by different names such as affirmative action, the policy of reservation, protective discrimination, positive discrimination, compensatory discrimination, does lead to some indisputable changes. Access to education for lower caste groups can lead to social mobility. However, it's not easy to assess the exact impact of the changes and difference in society brought about by this policy. One of the reasons for this difficulty is the scarcity of detailed data on the composition of higher educational enrollments. India's reservation policies in the educational sphere are structured and administered in an overly complex manner. Based on the nature of the institution, both the central and state governments oversee the implementation of reservation policies. The national policy for the reservation of seats in higher educational institutions for SC and ST students was established in the early 50s. However, its actual implementation was delayed by a decade or two in various regions and institutions, and even now it's not fully established everywhere. The number of seats meant to be reserved in all centrally controlled higher educational institutions is 15% for SCs, 7.5% for STs, and 27% for the OBCs. Similarly, state-controlled higher educational institutions determine the proportion of seats to be reserved based on the proportion of these groups in the state's population. In the case of seats reserved for SC and ST students, in spite of having differential cutoff scores and relaxation of age limits, in some courses, a few seats may still remain unfilled. Poverty coupled with lack of educational opportunities hinders the utilization of the reservation policy in such cases. However, the academic capacities of students from vulnerable groups cannot be questioned once they find a place within these educational institutions. Patwardhan and Palshikar's 1992 study on the impact of reservation policies found that roughly 1/6 of a sample of SC and ST students who were admitted against reserved seats scored high enough in the qualifying entrance examination to have been admitted as general category students. In the case of OBC students in reserved seats, the corresponding figure was roughly 5/6. The exact level of the impact of these policies is hard to ascertain, but certain conclusions about the overall impact of reservation policies on the representation of SC and ST students in higher educational institutions can be obtained by different studies. The provision of reserved seats has made a significant difference in the representation of SC and ST students in Indian universities and other educational institutions. The absence of educational and economic opportunities and benefits since childhood makes it difficult for many SC/ST students to succeed in open competition for general entry seats at prestigious institutions. It is much harder to estimate the number of SC and ST enrollment attributable to reservation policies in the vast majority of Indian higher educational institutions, where admission requirements are much less demanding than those prevalent in the case of elite schools. A considerable number of SC and ST applicants score high enough in the relevant examinations to qualify for general entry admission to some non-elite institutions. In many cases, the effect of reservation policies is simply to redistribute students from socially economically deprived groups upward in the hierarchy of institutional selectivity and quality. Reserved seats not only provide students from marginalized groups suffering from the burden of lifetime differential access opportunities for securing admissions, but also help them confront a number of other social and economic challenges. For one thing, a reserved seat provides improved education, which in turn is both helpful and useful when entering the job market. Second, admission to a reserved seat enhances the ability of a large number of SC, ST and OBC students to gain access to financial and other forms of government support, without which staying in a school may prove very difficult. Government provision of scholarships, special hostels, food, supplies and book loans have enabled many students from marginalized communities to enter and continue in higher education. Though such support is usually inadequate to meet all the economic and social needs of some students, it often becomes a decisive factor in determining whether a student decides to continue his or her education or drop out of school. Reservations and merit. There is an argument that merit is being ignored in a system that permits reservations based on non-academic characteristics. It is flawed because it accepts the point of view that merit is the prerogative of only those who possess academic competence. The flaws in the argument that unequal access to higher education could be explained as being determined only by merit by the opponents of reservation are too obvious to need much rebuttal. As Mark Glanter has pointed out, three broad kinds of resources are necessary to produce the results in competitive exams that qualify as indicators of merit. A. Economic resources for prior education, training materials, freedom from work, etc. B. Social and cultural resources, networks of contacts, confidence, guidance and advice, information, etc. C. Intrinsic ability and hard work. It is some combination of these that allows people to acquire merit. It clearly points out to the need to revisit the entire argument for and against caste-based reservations in education and seek empirical answers to the debate. Similar evidence has also been forthcoming in recent years to prove that the rate of growth of academic achievement measured in terms of numerical marks of scheduled castes, scheduled tribes and other backward classes is much faster than those in non-reserved categories in professional colleges and residential schools. Reservations and efficiency. With regard to efficiency and reservations, there appears to be a great deal of confusion about the concept of social efficiency and the implications of reservations. Efficiency is generally considered as a relationship between inputs and outputs. In the case of education, the inputs of students are the home background, tradition of education in the family, language, codes, etc. and the output is the IQ or achievement scores. Further, there is very little discussion on how social efficiency is affected by capitation colleges in the case of children from rich families with poor school records, and also the corrupting influence of money and power in manipulating academic merit. Social efficiency is not independent of considerations of social objectives which should govern the principle of selection of individuals in educational institutions and in bureaucracy. Technical efficiency is one aspect of social efficiency. Even in this respect, the selection process is not neutral to the social background of groups in power. There are also other aspects of social efficiency which are often ignored in discussions on the question of reservations. These include the need for correcting the imbalances in the formation of elite class in a stratified society and issues of social justice. That the complex, diverse and hierarchical character of Indian society is strongly displayed through the caste system, which divides and excludes individuals and groups based on birth, occupation and income. Social exclusion in its more specific manifestation is discrimination and refers to the process through which groups are wholly or partially restricted from full participation in economic and educational institutions that define social membership. So long as caste system exists, marginalized groups are likely to be discriminated on account of their birth. It is true that reservation has helped lower castes to gain their voices in the upper caste hegemonic scenario of the Indian society in education and other prominent areas. Thus, the idea of reservation has helped lower castes to have an equal chance in accessing opportunities. Many studies in the area of education, however, show that inequality and discrimination still continue in educational institutions. It can be concluded from the foregoing discussion that although education is supported by various material and non-material incentives, prominently the reservation policy, these have not always been effectively implemented, and legislation has proven to be controversial. Modernization process and the constitutional provisions helped marginalized communities to access education, but these were limited. We still need caste reservations for different groups in higher education, not because they are the perfect instruments to rectify long-standing discrimination, but because they are the most workable method to move in this direction. The nature of Indian society ensures that without such measures, social discrimination and exclusion will only persist and be strengthened. In this presentation that was based on the module titled Caste and Educational Discourse, we were able to analyze and understand the different dimensions from which the relationship between caste and education can be understood. It's true that the Constitution of India removed all hurdles for entry to educational institutions for some caste groups that were denied that access for several centuries in this society. However, the provision of equality does not ensure equal utilization. Caste continues to operate as a block for many groups for entering educational institutions. And when caste intersects with poverty, with gender and unequal access to resources, children and youngsters who have been born into castes placed lower down in the social hierarchy continue to suffer deprivation as compared to those who are born into castes placed in advantageous positions. So I hope that this model will help you to raise questions and seek answers for the reality of caste still playing its role in determining educational access and utilization that includes performance.